There's no way that the Cook Islands can take a judgment from the US and do anything with it. It's worth nothing in the Cook Islands. Zero. It's just shut down. Mm-hmm. So you have to start from scratch. You have to start everything all over again.
All right, let's talk about your claim to fame when I first met you at that conference that we were at, because you introduced the Bridge Trust.
Yeah.
And that, to me, was absolutely mind-blowing. So I'd love for you to, elaborate on that.
Okay. So in the world of asset protection, in the last 40 years, it has evolved, right? It has basically been birthed in the 80s and evolved. There is something called an asset protection trust. And the asset protection trust is really kind of the granddaddy of it. This is the big 900-pound gorilla in the room. This is what really protects assets. So these were first created in 1984 with the Cook Islands Trust Act. Cook Islands Trust Act is a statute in the Cook Islands, which is a little far away down in the South Pacific, kind of south of Hawaii, equal distance from the equator. Very Hawaiian type, Polynesian type vibe to it. Yeah. And they didn't have a lot of business except black pearls, which mostly went to Asia, and a little bit of tourism. And so they said, well, gosh, the Bahamas and Bermuda and Cayman Islands, they're all financial centers. What can we do? So they read about this attorney in Colorado that was trying to come up with some kind of asset protection using a jurisdiction, in Gibraltar or somewhere, not them. And they said, wow, this guy might need some help. And so they called him up and said, hey, we see what you're trying to do. Would it help if we passed a statute specifically for you to do this? And he said, what? I said, yeah, would it help if we passed an actual statute with whatever you want in it? And he goes, oh, wait a second, you're gonna let me draft the statute to protect my clients from creditors. You're gonna pass the statute and then we're gonna use your jurisdiction. And they said, yeah, we need some business. We need to create some business. So this will create a trust company business. He said, okay, great. So together they drafted a statute which became the Cook Islands Trust Act of 1984. In this statute, he said, well, if I get anything I want anybody having to prove it into this trust to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the murder standard. It's the 99.9% sure standard. It's very difficult to meet, and it's not used for civil cases in the US. So right there, it's like, okay, good luck with that. I don't want them getting a contingent fee attorney. I don't want getting a free attorney. They're gonna have to pay for an attorney, so no contingent fees. I don't want them to have very long to file this, so statute of limitations, let's make it really short. If they lose, which they're probably gonna lose with that burden of proof, I want them to have to pay the fees and the costs for the winner, which is called the loser pays system, which we don't do in the United States. And then he said, I want to make it very difficult for anyone to come down here. And so if you do file a claim, you can't amend it. So you can't get in, like here we file a claim, then we get into discovery, and then we find a new claim and we amend the claim this is called a fishing expedition. No fishing expeditions in the Cook Islands, ironically, because it's great fishing down there. But no fishing expeditions in the courtroom in the Cook Islands. So it just became like, this is no chance, right? So that was the first, and that started getting used. A lot of commentators here in the US basically said, that's not gonna work. US courts are gonna shut that down. That's against public policy. You can't just opt out of the legal system. A lot of lawyers were saying that. My father, who was very early in this industry, came along. He met with Barry Engel, who's the attorney in Colorado who drafted that original statute for the Cook Islands. And he went down to the various jurisdictions that had started to pass similar statutes, including Belize and Nevis. And we now have about 24 different offshore jurisdictions with similar statutes. And so for a while there, it was a little bit like, what's gonna happen? So we had a few cases and a few big cases, one being the Federal Trade Commission in what's called the Anderson case, who came down and said, we're gonna break this open. We're gonna prove this doesn't work. And so the government, with all its resources, with all its money, with all its effort, went down there with a very good case. These Andersons were fraudsters, stealing money from little old ladies in Pasadena, literally. Yeah, it was like a Ponzi scheme, yeah. But they had like $12 billion sitting in this Cook Islands Trust, and the FTC could not get it. And so not only did it not break the jurisdiction, it kind of made the jurisdiction.
That's amazing.
It is amazing. And so it kind of became a thing. And the US came along and said, well, geez, this seems to be working. A guy looked at it and said, his name was Jonathan Blotmacher. Jonathan actually was my professor at my tax master's program at NYU.
Wow.
He taught a class called Asset Protection, believe it or not. And after he taught that class, he went up to Alaska, and he convinced Alaska, hey, why are we sending all this business to the Cook Islands and all these offshore jurisdictions? You're practically not the United States. Let's just create a statute. And Alaska said, why not? So Jonathan drafted a statute very similar to the Cook Islands statute. However, there were some market differences. One, Alaska is, whether you think it or not, part of the United States, and therefore under the Constitution. So while Alaska can draft a similar statute, they can't do what the Cook Islands did, which is to say the Cook Islands is prohibited from recognizing any other judicial proceedings from any other jurisdiction in the world. Statutorily prohibited. So there's no way that the Cook Islands can take a judgment from the US and do anything with it. It's worth nothing in the Cook Islands. Zero. But in a
shutdown,
it's just shut down. Mm-hmm. So you have to start from scratch. You have to start everything all over again. If you can, if you've met the statute of limitations, and if you're willing to go into a beyond a reasonable doubt burden of proof and pay for your attorneys and expect to lose and pay all the costs and fees of the winner. Pretty intimidating. So Alaska said, let's make this more accessible to people, because that's a lot of work. There are some downsides to the foreign trust, which we'll talk about. Okay. And so he passed the statute. The challenge with the statute is that it's still in the United States. So Alaska is still subject to Article 4, Section 1 of the Constitution, which says the states must grant full faith and credit to the laws and judicial proceedings of the other states.
So that means they're not shutting it down 100%.
They cannot shut it down. So if you get a judgment against you in California and you have an Alaska or a Nevada or a Wyoming or a Delaware domestic asset protection trust, they have to domesticate the judgment. They have to adjudicate it. They have to see it. And so it was a good thing from my opinion, because I was like, fantastic. We've now answered the question of whether this is somehow against US public policy. We have almost half the states that have a statute. So we can say it's valid. There's nothing wrong with doing an asset protection trust. The question is where should you do it? And my answer is that offshore is great, but the downsides are it's very expensive to set up, but more importantly, it's very expensive to maintain. When I tell clients, if I'm proposing an offshore trust, I want them to be prepared, and I say, look, at a very minimum, we're talking about $10,000 a year, more like $15,000 plus a year to maintain the structure.
Okay, but I mean, that cost obviously is saving them from the potential of what they could actually lose. So what type of client would this serve, do you feel as though is the best type of client for this trust?
For the offshore trust?
Yes.
So for the offshore trust, when we do trust, we do about 5% of our trust as fully offshore from day one. Okay. And I can tell you those clients are extremely high risk clients, where it's not kind of not a matter of if, but when they're going to have a lawsuit. And when they have a lawsuit, it's likely to be a big lawsuit. So they're doing something that is just by its nature pretty risky. They're very wealthy clients that have enough in resources where they can nest egg a portion of money, $5 or $10 million, and just say, you know what, I'm going to put this in my offshore trust. I'm going to open up a Swiss account. I'm going to move it offshore. We're going to have this completely off the radar so that no matter what happens, I still have my nest egg. And ironically, I was watching Diary of a CEO. Do you guys watch that podcast? It's very good. Kevin O'Leary was on there, and
I do watch that.
Yes,
I do. I love that podcast.
And he said, Kevin O'Leary said, I have my nest egg, and I take $5 million. That's what I consider enough to, no matter what happens, I can start over with $5 million. I just put it over here and I put it in treasuries. That's what Kevin said. And I say, that's what I tell my clients all the time. If you've got the kind of wealth that you can take $5 million and just forget about it, that's the time for a foreign asset protection trust. Let's just go ahead and put it there. Let's put it offshore. You don't have to put it in treasuries, but you could, and just let it sit there and grow and forget about it. That's a good use for it. So very high risk clients or very wealthy clients that just want to nest egg something. The third category would be clients that are just absolutely so low threshold of risk tolerance that they need the absolute maximum protection, and they're not sensitive to the cost or the compliance. because that's the second thing about the foreign trust, is that they do have much more compliance. Compliance in the form of Form 3520 and Form 3520A, which is an annual form that goes to the IRS.
And you file this for the clients as well?
No, their CPA files this for the clients. The cost of this is part of that $15,000 a year. The cost of this is what I've seen, $3,500, $5,000, $7,000, something. It's not an insignificant return. It's an important return. The penalty for not filing it is massive. It's like 30% of the trust assets if you fail to file it. The IRS is deadly serious about this. They're not very forgiving if you forget. So these kind of things make the average client, millionaire next door with $5 million go, do I really need an offshore trust with $5 million? I'm not taking $5 million and nesting it. My whole thing is $5 million.
Right.
And I want the protection, but that seems like a little much. Not only that, of course, you're going to have a foreign trustee, which is part of the cost, and that's going to mean that trust is in control of that trustee. All these things are overcomable. All of them are reasonable in the context of needing it. But for many of my clients, and in my case, about 95% of my clients, it's a little too much. It's just a little overkill.
So are you thinking like, can you give us an example of what that person looks like? Are they doctors? Are they, what are they?
My average client?
That would utilize that trust.
So the clients that utilize that trust are, again, they're either super high risk, they're selling something online that is, or they're in a business that's already kind of targeted.
Okay.
There's a certain series of businesses out there that the government has even said, like check cashing. It's legal, but government really hates it. Hard money lending. It's allowed. Government really hates it. And so there's a lot of things where the risk, nutraceuticals, selling vitamins, that's legal and unregulated. The problem is that when you make claims, the FTC gets their hair in a wad. You know, they get their hackles up because you're saying, hey, this cures this, or this extends your life, and there's no science behind it, right? And so those kind of businesses are the kind of people for a fully foreign trust, because they also might be making a lot of money. And so they just want to be sure. And if they get into trouble. Or the ultra wealthy who just want to nest egg something. But that's here. Then there's the rest of us.
Right.
So then the question is, well, okay, we've already talked about the domestic, which is, trying to be as good as the foreign, but it's just not. Case law supports that it's not. It's been broken several times. Doesn't have a great track record, in my opinion. And honestly, I don't know a lot of attorneys that are still really big proponents of the domestic trusts. There are some out there. I'm not one of them. I think there's a better tool. And that's what you mentioned, which is the bridge trust. So what the bridge trust is it's actually, so I'll tell you how I designed it, how I came up with it. I looked at the landscape and I said, okay, we've got this foreign trust. It's fantastic, but for all the reasons we discussed, it's a little overkill for most people. We've got these domestic trusts, but for all the reasons we discussed, it's not quite enough. Is there any way I can get both? Can I get the simplicity of the domestic, but with the protection of the foreign? And I realized that there is a way. Because the foreign trust is defined as foreign based on where you register the trust and how you meet the qualifications of that jurisdiction. So a bridge trust is a foreign trust. We draft it and register it offshore. But then for the purpose of the IRS, what determines a domestic trust has nothing to do with the registration. It has to do only with two things: a court test and a control test, as defined in 7701 of the IRS, our Internal Revenue Code. And the control test is basically, is a U.S. person control the trust, which means is it the trustee? And does a U.S. court have primary supervision over the trust? And so I just meet that two-part test. So by meeting that two-part test, but still having the trust registered offshore, I really am getting both. I'm getting a trust that lives in both places. And so it's very easy to manage while it's a U.S. domestic trust. It does not have any of that foreign trust compliance because it's not considered a foreign trust. It's a domestic, it's a grantor trust, which means disregarded for tax purposes. It's just pass-through neutral.
Right.
The clients are their own beneficiaries. And in many cases, the clients are their own trustees. So what we have is a trust that is really as simple to manage as an average revocable living trust. Very easy. However, we have a protector, and that protector can, at some point, if the client gets into trouble, say, hey, I'm going to declare an event of duress. And when that happens, he can activate that offshore trustee, because we do have an offshore trustee, but they're in a standby role. They're not in an active role. And so when he activates that offshore trustee, bingo, all of a sudden that trust just crosses the bridge. At that point, we fail the two-part test, so we're no longer a domestic trust, which is what we want.
Fine.
And it's still a grantor trust. So we have not triggered any extra taxes. We now have to do the 3520. We now have the $10,000 to $15,000 a year of maintenance, but we're doing that when we're using it.
Right, it's a safety net. You get like a little red button that you get to push,
exactly.
just in case.
Yeah.
Just press the
Yeah, well, I should have one of those buttons.
time.
There.
Yeah, you need one.
I know.
It talks to you.
Eject.
Doug, file.
Eject. Bridge trust. Cross the bridge. I'm going to have one made.
Do it.
I will.
Are you going to send
I'm
one?
going to send them all to my clients.
Send me one.
Say, cross the bridge. And then it dials me directly.
It'll be
like, hello?
amazing. It's like a bat phone.
Yeah, like the bat phone, the bat button.
I think we're dating ourselves right there.
Oh my God.
Stop it.
So that's it. So I've been using this for now almost 30 years. And I still have the same basic structure. I mean, I've updated my language many, many times over the years, but the same basic framework is still in place.
Have you pressed the bat button though?
Oh yeah, I've had to press the bat button many times. It's inevitable. In 30 years of practice with thousands of clients, there's no way I wasn't going to have to press it. I have pressed it, dozens upon dozens of times. It's about a half a dozen times a year that I have to press it, because again, I've got a lot of clients.
That's still decent though. That's still a big number.
It's a big number of reference points, so I know how it works. I know how to make sure it works. I understand all the ins and outs. I can tell you in the first 10 years of my practice, there were things I needed to learn. After 30 years, you actually do know how to make this work.
So you had a few hiccups.
I had a few hiccups. In the beginning, I didn't register my trust offshore. I just had it kind of as a, you can go if this happens. And then I had to trigger it. And I found out going offshore, if you hadn't pre-wired it, was very difficult. I made it work, but it was so difficult that I'm like, I won't be doing that again.
Talk about stress.
That's when I built the bridge, because before it's what I would call a trampoline trust, which is a domestic trust that they say, oh, if you have any problem, you can go offshore. Try jumping out of a 4-floor building that's on fire and to hit the trampoline and then make it across the ocean. That's what that felt like. So I don't use a trampoline trust. There are people out there that still use a trampoline trust. I don't recommend it. I think a bridge trust is much stronger because we're building the bridge. We have the offshore trustee. We're doing the due diligence. We've registered the trust. We're not taking any chances. This is not we think this is going to work. We've done it dozens and dozens of times and it's worked every time. So we know it's going to work.